Founded in 1855, Dharamshala, which literally means the holy refuge, is one of the 80 hill resorts developed in the 17th century by the British. Also known as Mini Lhasa due to the heavy presence of exiled Tibetans living here, it is a perfect getaway for the jaded city souls. The Tibetan influence makes Dharamshala a unique cultural cocktail. This scenic destination is the seat of His Holiness Dalai Lama and has become the center for Buddhist learning.
We like to see everything we can, So that's the reason why. Maybe some want to know more about Buddhism. Well, it's a pity we can't meet the Dalai Lama. We'd like to meet him. I know it's impossible. Well, he was in France a few weeks ago.
But it's a good place to study. It's a good place to get acquainted with many aspects of Tibetan culture. I mean, this is the main draw, I think, for most Westerners who come to this area. There are many, many, many reasons to go different places in India for Indian culture, but probably the Westerners who come here are first attracted to the Tibetan culture.
At McLeodganj, the main suburb of Dharamshala, one can sample the Tibetan culture. Visit the Namgyalma Stupa at the center of McLeodganj. Or check out the large gilded bronzes of the Buddha. And the giant prayer wheels are sure to give you an otherworldly feel. You can also get a piece of Tibetan culture to take back home. This town is known for Tibetan handicrafts.
Economies the world over are reeling under the impact of novel coronavirus. The International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Asian Development Bank and international rating agencies have all come out with projections on the economic fallout of COVID-19. The Government of India has unveiled an economic package for the poor, the RBI had announced an economic stimulus, and the Government of India has now issued guidelines outlining the exemptions and prohibitions for various sectors during the course of Lockdown 2.0, that is, till the 3rd of May. So how does India Inc. view these interventions? To talk about that and more, we are joined by the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, Chandrajit Banerjee. Welcome, Mr. Banerjee, to DD India.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm good. Let's begin with the guidelines that have been unveiled by the government. Do you see those guidelines as a graded exit plan, which the CII too had recommended in the first place? The CII, I understand, has suggested to the government a graded exit plan. So do you welcome this step of the government? How do you see it?
So this is a very, very critical step. I think after 3 weeks of a complete lockdown, which was extremely necessary given the type of challenges that India was facing along with the globe, we have been able to remain ahead of the curve by this very, very strong lockdown over the last 3 weeks. But along with this lockdown comes a lot of economic pain, and you talked about it, and that those economic pain needs to be sort of mitigated through a very balanced approach which does not affect life, and that's very, very critical. And therefore, we have been talking about for quite some time if one could see given that the entire of India is not uniform, and India cannot have one full, one size fit all type of a policy. So we could look at those areas which are the red zones or the green zones or the amber zones, and see how we could bring in some amount of slackening of the lockdown so that livelihood is sort of well looked after. And I think today's guidelines that has come out is indeed very, very far-reaching, very, very well thought through. It gives a time period to plan, because we really look at that from the 20th of April. And second, it really gives a huge focus on how livelihood at the bottom of the pyramid and across the chain can be well looked after and protected. So it's a welcome move, it's a great move, and it really falls it's quite similar to something that we were hoping from the industry that we would get. So it's very, very encouraging, And we therefore see a situation today that we will be able to create a huge balance between life, which is so important, and livelihood, which was becoming a challenge. And through this, we would be able to address many cross sections of the society, so that we can remain safe and protected economically.
You're saying that a balance has now emerged between lives and livelihoods through these guidelines that the Government of India has issued. We are aware that there are exemptions that have been unveiled for the agriculture sector
Yes.
as a whole, which includes farming operations, marketing, sales, etc. Besides that, there are exemptions that have been announced for fisheries, for aquaculture, for animal husbandry, even for plantations. How important is this to boost rural demand in order to give a booster shot to the economy?
So, it's come at a very right time. It's come at a time when the Rabi season, the harvesting season, is just on. We have had a very good harvest, and therefore to see to it that it doesn't go waste. This focus on agriculture was extremely important, and this is exactly at this point in time that an intervention was required, that we could be linked to the mandis, we could be linked to the entire of the rural farm produce, so to say. We require a lot of farm implements and equipments to reach the farm, and I think all of that has been very comprehensively addressed through this guidelines which has come out, and it's timely, as I said, because we have had a very good Rabi season, and therefore it's needed that we are able to help our farmers and protect their incomes. So that's a very important point. Again, if you really look at it, we are wasting a huge amount of our resources and our human resources especially, and the people and livelihood, if we were not focusing on this very important areas of fisheries. And I'm so happy that we have a special mention of fisheries. So agriculture, and I would guess that it would also include irrigation, so to say, need and requirement, because again, India is not one. What is the harvest season over here? As you go down the south, you will need irrigation requirements too. So all of that together would be extremely important to see that the farmer's livelihood, the farmer's income is very well protected. So this was a very, very important, this was one of our very strong recommendations to seeing how the agriculture sector could be focused upon.
Now, besides the agriculture sector, there is also focus in the guidelines on the services sector, because there are exemptions for IT enabled services, for e-commerce companies, as well as for those hotels where some tourists may be stranded. So how important is that in the context of the services sector, because that forms, in terms of numbers, the backbone of the Indian economy. After all, 60% of GDP is accounted by it.
So, one of the sectors which could have been less affected by the COVID-19 was the IT sector, so to say. And IT sector has been able to really live up to its reputation and expectation by really being able to at this point in time work, or rather double up their efforts and work. And if there is a facilitation, and they can work from home, they can work from many locations, and that incentivization of them being able to start their or rather restart their operations would be of great value, because that supports a huge ecosystem both in India and outside. So I would imagine India being an important IT and an ITES sort of a destination of the world, this would be of great value, and this would really help us again mitigate the challenges that all of us know that we are having on the economy front. Our GDP is going to be affected, and therefore this itself will help us create that amount of economic activity which will help us towards that growth figure.
As far as industrial establishments are concerned, those that have access to, say, SEZs, which is special economic zones, or export-oriented units, or industrial townships and industrial estates, have also been allowed, though there are restrictions with regard to the lodging of workers, the transportation of workers. How important is this exemption as a whole, and do you expect India Inc. to follow those kind of restrictions?
See, from day zero of this lockdown, one of the things that we have been talking about from the industry is that there is a huge responsibility for the industry also. The government has its work well cut out, but industry also has a huge responsibility. Industry's responsibility definitely is to see that it collaborates with the government's efforts, especially when it comes to the lives of people. And if we have to have both, as we talked about a little earlier, life and livelihood, industry's responsibility would be to see how it can create a protocol which would help them function, but at the same time function safely. And I think industry is well geared up for it, and I think industry should follow those guidelines and those protocol extremely carefully. Different industries will have different types. A plant, say for instance, can function with a couple of shifts instead of maybe 3 shifts, maybe having that less number of workers, I mean 50% of the workers, so to say, as per the guidelines. And then they could have the social distancing well maintained, giving them food, as it's been also said that if you are, some of them can operate if there is availability of shelter, so for instance within the industrial estate. So all of this could be done based on the ability of the ability in terms of the firm, but not on, I wouldn't say ability in the sense of like that whether or not they do it. It should be extremely important for each and every firm who are operating from the 20th of April to follow these as very strict important implementation processes.
And one may add here that there will be punitive action taken against violators.
There should be very strong punitive action taken against those who are not following them. So I think that's given. So having given that, I think we should be able to see, and one of the things that which I often hear, and even the Honorable Prime Minister has been talking about it, if we are able to carry ourselves well, if we are able to do come out of this well, we will see further opening up. We will be, obviously there nobody wants to be in a lockdown, no one in this country would like to be in a lockdown. So moment we are able to handle this, and if we are handling it through these protocols, through these strictures that we have, we will be able to open up even faster.
From the perspective of the MSME sector, how do you look at what the guidelines really entail in terms of allowing infrastructure creation, especially in rural areas? Considering the importance of the MSME sector, there are so many people that are employed there, and there were concerns initially that a lockdown may hit the MSME sector the most, but has the government now by and large taken care of those concerns, at least beginning with the step of allowing infrastructure creation for MSMEs in villages?
So I would think that the MSME, they are two big issues which rest with the MSMEs. They are the largest employer, so to say, and also they are a huge contributor to the exports of India. Having said that, today the MSME is still even now very pained. We are looking forward to the 20th of April when there are lots of exemptions being given to the MSMEs, industrial estates away from towns, MSMEs in the rural areas, the cottage industries, etc. Lots of exemption being given to them. But at the same time, I must say that there is an expectation, and one is waiting also very carefully to see what type of financial packages come out. How does the banks behave? As you rightly said at the opening of the show, that the RBI has done its bit, but then we need to see the banks also giving that much of space to the MSMEs, so that the banks should be very careful when they are handling MSMEs. The MSMEs are cash strapped. They are employing people. They need to pay. There is no income at this point in time. So where does this? So once they start functioning, they would need that working capital. So a lot more is expected to be done for the MSMEs. A lot has been done in terms of the opening up. A lot needs to be done on the fiscal space, and I think that's very, very critical for us to see. Our MSMEs are competitive, but our MSMEs also require a lot of help in terms of when it comes to their daily functioning, their working capital, to speak, so to say. We would require MSMEs to be given that 3 months of, say, salaries and wages that they would need to pay at a competitive rate from the banks. So I would think that a lot of the financial package that we are looking forward to can be routed through the banks, and a large amount of that would actually be helping our MSMEs. But today, with this gradual coming down of the lockdown, we see them being able to function from the 20th of April, so that they have got that space to function. They were unable to function so far. There were various challenges. They would have laid off people, but you have been given that lifeline that you can function. Now, if the financial lifeline also comes into them, I think we will be able to tide over this crisis very effectively.
Okay, I'll take your thoughts later on the RBI economic stimulus, but before that I wish to know if the CII has worked on any sort of study or assessment on the likely impact that COVID-19 in terms of economic fallout is likely to have on India, and is that now likely to change considering that a graded exit plan is already now in place?
So, what we obviously have 3 weeks, 3 dead weeks of completely, and we will also have another dead week in front of us. Having said that, obviously, and if you see the world economy, which is so heavily challenged today, we will definitely be looking at a situation where we will have a sub 2% growth in the Indian economy for this fiscal. And when we look at a sub 2% growth this fiscal, I think while we start functioning once again, we'll have to see how we are able to use our competitive advantages and exploit them very well. The world is looking at India, and the world is looking at India very positively because it needs an alternate destination from China, so to say. And therefore, we have a huge opportunity. And I would think that that's the opportunity that we should look forward to. Yes, we are challenged. Yes, we will have much lesser growth. But yes, going forward, say or after a few quarters, we would be able to make up and really exploit the opportunities that come our way.
On the RBI's economic stimulus, you said that it's now important for banks to pass on the benefits. Do you expect going forward a graded stimulus, fiscal as well as monetary, over a period of time, or do you think that what's been done is by and large sufficient, because the RBI has already come up with a stimulus of over 3 lakh crore rupees, and what the government has done is something worth 1.7 lakh crore rupees for the urban and rural poor?
So, it's like this. I would imagine that it's extremely important for the government to be very careful, because this is not going to be something which is going to go away in a month or two. This is there to stay for 3-4 months. This is a huge economic challenge, so to say. And when you have an economic challenge here to stay, this will not be what we are expecting the finance ministry to come out with very soon, the government to come out with another fiscal package. That wouldn't be the last one. So after 3 to 4 months, we might have to look forward to the government once again. So it should not spend all its horsepower in one go. So we need to have a very good graded approach. And at this point in time, I would think that look at about 2%, somewhere between 2 to 3% of the GDP, and address it to the bottom of the pyramid.
Is that a reasonable expectation to make, considering the strain on government resources?
I would think that 2 to 3% is a possible, credible, demand to have. Not those 10% or 12%. I don't think that that's something which will be feasible for the government to print so much of notes to really get into a situation which will get into.
And we can't compare ourselves to developed countries that have announced 10% of GDP as a bailout, because there's a whole lot of a difference.
Well, those are also debatable, whether it's 10% is really a 10%, and as you know very well. So we would really look at that, and a lot of the other financial packages, I would imagine, should be routed through the banks, like loans on salaries, so 3 months of loans on salaries, moratorium on those. So a lot of it can be routed through the banks with the government as a guarantor, would help, and when that deficit hits, that would hit us later, not at this point in time. So we'd also take those hits in tranches rather than everything at one go. So we need to be a little prudent in the way we should be able to give the Ministry of Finance to come out with this. And I would imagine that they would do it. I would hopefully that they would do it sometime in the next 7 days or so before we open up, so that when companies start functioning, they would have these levers with the banks, etc., so that which they can utilize, for instance, for their working capital, etc.
What is India Inc. doing in terms of executing its social responsibilities, for instance, for migrant workers, for contract workers, or for low wage earners, because many of them are stranded in these situations, and there is a social responsibility that corporate India has.
Absolutely important point, and I think corporate India has the ability to have large corporates, and the corporate India has shown earlier in the way it has operated that it has been very responsible as far as CSR is concerned. So at this point in time, they need to rise above it, and they need to rise above by seeing to it that their own, number one, if somebody has to take a hit of salary, so to say, let it be the top management which can afford that. And there are good examples of that which has already been set by many of our corporates. So which is a great beginning. We have a code of conduct which CII has sent out to its membership. In that we have said that we will refrain from retrenching the junior, the blue collar workers. We'll not do that for the moment, and that's very important.
That's what the CII is doing, but there are reports that have come to the fore of retrenchment as well as salary cuts, and that is a pain that employees are taking.
So obviously there are two sides of it, and I think when you really look at a mid-sized company, the large companies may be able to refrain it for a while because they have deep pockets, they have reserves, they will be able to handle it for some time. But a mid-sized companies, the small companies, for them to be able to give that wages and salaries at this point in time becomes very difficult because they don't have any income and they have a fixed expenditure on a monthly basis. So obviously they will resort to it. So our idea is to see how we could through these bank lendings, which could have that low interest rates and that guarantee, and also look at those waiving off of the NPAs. We can give that space to the private sector, and if that space is given to the private sector, I think they should be very cautious and very restrained in looking after, as you said, the bottom of the pyramid, and that's going to be very, very critical. Otherwise, we will have a social unrest in the country. So it's a very huge responsibility on all corporates to see how they are able to balance it. It's tough time. So in the tough time, we all have to work together. There is a responsibility of the government. There is a responsibility of the corporate sector. There is a responsibility of people. So all of this needs to be very well orchestrated and very well done in partnership. So and corporate sector has a huge role. Some very good stories are there. Some very good stories of corporates trying to reach out to the migrant workers to see to it that they are very well looked after. People have not people have not been have not been retrenched. There are very good stories. People where wages have not been cut, but at the same time, yes, there are pressures and strains on many sections. Even large companies would have been under pressure if these guidelines would not have come out. So that's the reason why I say these guidelines are extremely timely. I mean, you can pull it on for a month or two, and it's just about a month that we have said.
Yes.
If the guidelines coming on the 20th is just for a month, is that one has said. So that can be again sort of worked upon.
And how has India Inc.'s response been to government's decision to treat corporate spending on combating COVID-19 as CSR?
So, this is a very, very, very important move by the government, and I think to bring in the CSR activities, to qualify them as CSR itself will help a lot of fund coming in, and as you see, there is an enthusiastic participation for corporates in 2-3 ways. One is to give to the government, into the PM CARE, say for instance, and also for them to also do their own spending, be it on fooding, shelter, be it on even doing up of things like the PPEs or the ventilators or the masks, etc. So, so there is a lot of corporates who have got involved. Therefore, even small companies, we run a foundation. There is a CII foundation where we have touched many lakhs of people at this point in time. I am seeing contribution not from the large companies only, but I am so happy to see that even the mid-sized companies, the small companies, giving that money, every money counts. So they are also wanting to collaborate and participate. And it's happening because it qualifies as CSR. So it's a very good point and very good thing that's been done by the government of India. Okay.
Now, the Indian economy as a whole is integrated with the global economy. So we are not insulated from the global economy in any way. There are trade restrictions that have been imposed. Do you see supply side constraints emerging for the industry as a whole because of these restrictions? And in a post-coronavirus world, do you also see a silver lining in a dark cloud with greater focus on Make in India, reduced dependence on imports, maybe building world-class capacities and also increasing our exports over a period of time?
We have been very severely challenged. Say, for instance, pharmaceutical sector was severely challenged because we were not having the API, so to say. Much of it comes from outside. We are also being challenged on other sectors like the electronic sector, which is heavily import dependent. So there are many sectors, which is the auto components and the auto sector to an extent also. So there are many sectors which were challenged in the last few weeks because of the supply chain that you talked about. But what's happening now is that there is a huge potential for India which has emerged of it being able to get into those sectors and to be self-sufficient over a period of time. So I think that's a realization which has come in when we were not being able to do it and get it from source it from rest of the world. I think Indian industry has also got together. We have been a part of many such deliberations and discussions over the last couple of weeks, and we're still on. And we're figuring out as to how we can take advantage, or rather, of India's strengths. India's strengths lies in its manufacturing sector. It is still, when our products come to the gate of the company, of a manufacturing company, it is very, very competitive. It is when it leaves the gate and goes to the port or goes to the point of sale, that's when the discomfort comes in, when it becomes so much more uncompetitive. Our logistics, say for instance, those are the things which we need to address, and I think a lot in terms of ease of doing business which has been done, but much more which can be done to help us get that competitiveness in the and prowess of manufacturing. So I see an opportunity there for India actually. And also the last part of your question, the world is also looking at alternative destinations to come and invest, to come and work on and build the value chains. So I would think that India, if we can get it right at this point in time over the next few weeks and months, we would be able to draw that type of capital and investments into India.
Now, India has emerged from economic crisis in the past as well. For instance, the balance of payment crisis of the early 1990s or the 2008 global financial crisis. But this is a black swan moment. We really don't know how long an economic revival would take. But any assessment that you may have, considering that we already have a graded exit plan in place, of how much time a revival could take?
So, you know, the revival is not only going to be, which will be dependent on what India will do and how India will do. It is, of course, there is a lot which will be on India, our policy frameworks and all the things that we said which will be associated with the graded moving away from the lockdown, the fiscal package that will come our way, etc. But at the same time, we'll also have to look at the global economy and how it picks up. As you rightly said, that these we will have at least about 1 quarter to be written off, and when you write off a quarter in a situation where the globe is also facing these challenges, I would think that if it's the fiscal 2020-21 is going to be a tough year for us, and we would be able to see ourselves picking up from next. I mean, while our work in terms of picking up the economy would begin in the next couple of months, if I would say, from the next quarter, so to say. But for us to be on a high growth, there is a possibility, then there is a definite possibility of India to still aspire for, and India should aspire for, an 8% plus growth in the next 3 to 4 years' time. And I think we can get back to that type of trajectory for growth. If we all work together, we should not miss this opportunity.
Okay. On a lighter note, how has life been during this lockdown?
Lighter note, it's been a pretty challenging time, but I don't know how lighter it has been. But definitely there's no difference between a Monday and a Friday or a Sunday. All the days look to be the same. But you do it in your own style. So you get into a meeting with shots, you get more time to play with your dogs, and the dogs get very strangely shocked to see us are always around at home. So those are lovely moments, yeah.
Any time you got to spend on your pastimes, I'm aware you're busy in meetings and dressed in a different manner altogether, but pastimes?
So pastimes is, as I said, one has been able to sometimes have the music on at home while you are working, which is very nice. And actually the way of working will change in India. And it's a very important point that you have touched, because more and more people have learned, I think, today to work much from home. And so much can be achieved, so many different types of stuff can be done from home, and you can do it at your own pace. You are doing it when, as I said, you are relaxed in terms of the dress, you are relaxed in terms of the way you are sitting, but you are being able to achieve your capacity. So that's a new way of working, which India Inc. will also experience as we get out of the lockdown completely over a point in time.
So a new normal emerging
there will
after
be a
this?
new normal emerging.
Okay.
A lot. I mean, a person who will be based in, say, Trichy can do work which was otherwise being done by a guy who was based out of Delhi. So, easily, I mean, distances and travel will come down. Travel will heavily come down. We have learned how to how to now work without traveling so much. And I would be on certain months traveling 50 to 20 days, and I have not traveled for the last 1 month. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, that's it then, Dr. Banerjee.
Thank you.
For speaking to us on DD India. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
In implementing lockdown measures, situation regarding essential commodities is satisfactory. Centre has written to the states and union territories to implement lockdown effectively at ground level. The rate of spread of COVID-19 in India is much lower than many developed countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, France and the US. The rate of testing is also high. India has conducted more tests per million than many developed nations. Total cases of COVID-19 in India reached